Hi, my name is Abby Kiley, and this is my summative reflection of growth for AP Lang. So, the best article that I think that I annotated and answered the analytical questions to was titled Joe Biden, Jim Crow, and Texas Voting. So I picked this article because I thought that it had the better development and use of soapstone, and I really used the annotations to help guide my answers to the questions that I answered after annotating. So to start off, the negative tone is something that I annotated throughout the article, and it contributed to the bias, which I relate to in the first question, because of the word choice association, and I explained the author's political bias using an annotated example of negative tone. So I mentioned negative tone up over here when the author is describing President Trump. And then the example that I used down below was right here in the light blue underneath. I specifically referred to this example in the first question, talking about the negative tone and really relating it to my annotations about why this is part of the author's argument. So I explained that in my question, which is one of the things I think that I did well with this article, is negative tone relating to my questions. So then also I overall just caught more of the main purpose of the article to get a better understanding. So I used emphasize, inform, persuade for the purposes. So right here, the purpose, inform about Biden distorting the truth, and this helped me to better understand the article. Here the purpose is to emphasize, and the purpose to persuade others that drive-through voting doesn't give enough privacy. So that really helped me understand the author's main point and why they're writing this article. So yeah, and then the last paragraph, I mentioned the subject of I highlighted it to be the subject of the article because the last couple paragraphs are really about and summing up what the whole article is about, which is the Texas voting and what Joe Biden came out and said about Texas voting, and the author trying to put some truth and disagreement behind that. So that's what these two last paragraphs are about, and I think that I did a good job identifying that. And then also in the beginning, identifying the subjects the author again mentions at the top. So those are some things that I think that I did well and why this is my best summer reading article. So then moving on to my worst summer reading article I picked was The Two Men Blocking Military Sexual Assault Reform. So I feel that I did not go as thorough into annotating, not as much deep analysis, missed some pathos and logos throughout this, and factual persuasion techniques that the author used for their argument. So I failed to really analyze the question responses. Like I mentioned in this first question, I mentioned what the quote was about, but then I didn't really go on to explain more on how this relates to what I'm talking about. So, and it's just not a strong piece of evidence because I use a quote, but then I don't really go on after that to explain any other points or how my evidence is really related to bias as much. So, just not as much deeper analysis. and it just wasn't strong evidence. So then also the author appeals to emotion multiple times throughout the article to convey the importance of the issue, which I didn't mention, which is ethos. So the last sentence, it mentions the bill that they're trying to pass for sexual assault reform in the military, and she says it in a way that conveys emotion, but I don't mention that in the article, or I don't mention that in my annotations, which would help to further develop to help me like answer the questions later on. So I and then there's also multiple other times where the author, especially in the beginning, mentions something having to do with emotion or evoking emotion, and I don't annotate that. So, and then also my main flaw is the author uses repeated mention of factual evidence and statistics that could help answer questions analytically, and I don't annotate that. I didn't annotate those things, which would that's a type of argumentative support that the author uses for their point. So over here, the author in this paragraph, the second paragraph on the second page, it says an estimated 20,500 service members were sexually assaulted or raped, including 13,000 women and 7,500 men, which is a very factual statistic that relates to logos, but I didn't mention that or highlight that, which could have been used in my questions down here. And early on in the first paragraph also mentioning the more than 30% of charges of sexual offense shouldn't have been brought to trial. So both of these are circumstances where I should have used this and would have been strong evidence, but I failed to analyze it as being factual and statistical and relating to the author's main point. So, and then for my questions that I answer later on, I don't provide good enough analysis by explaining why. So I state a quote, but then I don't analyze the quote into relating back to the main claim of the question. And I'm missing some of these rhetoric techniques that really could have been influential in my answers. And yes, I missed logos and pathos also, like I just mentioned before. So yeah, that's why I think that this is my worst article, just missing some major points, and my analysis just isn't strong for this article. So that's why I picked it as my worst. So moving on to the in-class discussion. Overall, I participated by providing evidence and also made sure to speak multiple times in the discussion. I believe that I could have been better prepared. My annotations were lacking in the article, and I did not fully analyze to the best of my ability that I could have done, and I wasn't my strongest in my annotations, which I feel like affected how I spoke in the discussion. So I feel like also I could do a better job gaining confidence in what I'm saying when I'm talking. I feel like that probably held me back from when I was discussing. I gained a new perspective from hearing other group members' responses and just hearing what other people had to say. Also, a specific instance in the article that I annotated, the author mentions their credibility. They were a former investigations editor, which could have been good to mention to analyze the author's argument, knowing that he has a background. I feel like would have been a good point to bring up into the discussion that I missed because I did not know about ethos, so I did not mention that in the discussion. So yeah, overall I think next time I will become better prepared with my annotations for the in-class discussion. So the rhetorical analysis essay pretest, I scored a 2 out of 6, and I agree with the score. I did not give thorough analysis really in any of my evidence. For example, in this, I think this is the third paragraph, I explained that Albright uses imagery, but I don't relate it back to the main claim. So I say that the author continues to use imagery throughout her speech, but then I don't say like why that. I don't say why that helps communicate the message. I don't relate it back to what I'm trying to say, which I think is one of my main problems in this essay is my analysis. I did not go the farther step of relating it back to the main point of what I'm trying to prove. And also, in the last paragraph, same thing. I say that she is using like sentence structure and then explain how it, how she does this, but then I don't relate it back to what I'm trying to say and explain it to the best of my ability. And then also with this pretest, the thesis doesn't explain rhetorical approach and like how it relates and how these relate to what she was talking about in the speech. I state them, but I don't give further information on how she uses these or anything, which I've now learned how to do, but I just say tone, imagery, and sentence structure instead of going further and explaining this more and more about the author and also mentioning her by her first name, or her full name, like Madeleine Albright instead of Albright in the beginning, is another mistake I made in the thesis. I also could have paraphrased in some parts for evidence. I provide a quote for imagery down here. It's from over here all the way to down here, which takes up a lot of room. And I could have easily paraphrased that quote, and it would, cut down some writing and be more concise and flow better in the essay. And then I still did give evidence, that did relate somewhat back to what I was stating, so I got 2 points for that, which is why I agree with it, but the other things were all lacking, especially the analysis, so that's why I do agree with my score for the rhetorical analysis essay pretest. So then finally, the cold read that we did, I feel that I actually really improved on this. I had a better understanding of soapstone. I added more inclusion down here. I added word choice, ethos, pathos, logos. And also I just my writing looks cleaner, and I spent the time really thinking about what I'm annotating and relating that to how I'm going to answer the questions, which helped me. I found the annotating more useful than when I'm thinking about how I'm going to use it. Does that make sense? So, I was more clear with the tone, too, throughout. Formal tone, bitter tone, scholarly, and this added more sophistication to my annotations. So formal, knowledgeable, confident, varying tones throughout, and I made sure to add a variety of different annotations. And then also, the evidence in my answers to the question goes deeper than just one quote. I don't quote everything. I paraphrase, and I make sure to relate back to the main claim. So, for example, in this one, I said the bias is that the author doesn't mention evidence and while providing much evidence supporting the College Board. And then down here, I say, from this, it shows how the author is choosing to give only one-sided evidence. So I really nail that in after explaining my evidence, and then finally relating it back to the main claim. And I do that again over here, talking about how the author wants the audience to feel good, and then at the end here. By doing this, it gives the audience statements that sway towards the College Board's AP being good. So I just make sure to really relate that back to the claim after what I've been taught. So, yeah, and so this shows my growth from how I have changed to paraphrasing and making sure I relate back to the main claim and point I'm trying to make, and also just having a deeper understanding of what soapstone is and what these things mean, so it better helps me annotate, or better helps me answer the questions that I am looking for. So yeah, this is the end of my screen recording.